Hi, I'm Chelsea Turner. I am the Instructional Design Coordinator here at South Arkansas Community College. I wanted to do a quick demo on graphic design because you, as an instructor, are creating content all the time. You create presentations, documents. You're always taking your content and somehow visually communicating it to your students. And graphic design is not just for looks. It is a powerful tool to communicate visually. So I want to help you make sure, are you communicating effectively? Are you really engaging your students in your content? And are you following some basic rules to make your content really accessible to your students? So I'm going to take my picture off so we can really focus on the slideshow here, because I tried as much as possible to really practice what I'm preaching on this slideshow. So there are some basics we need to talk about first before we move any further on just some presentation etiquette. Hopefully you know this. This is really basic stuff, but let's just get it out of the way right now. Make sure when you're creating presentations, there's not too much text. You don't have a lot of clutter. You don't have bad contrast. That's not just because it's hard to read or see. Like, there's some accessibility issues there too. So make sure you have good contrast. Do not read out your slides verbatim. It's actually proven that if you have a lot of text and you are talking about it or reading it to your students are trying to read the text that you've put on your presentation, and they are trying to listen to you, and it becomes a lot and they become really confused. So try to keep your presentations to just a few important topics, maybe words and some images, and then elaborate on those so that students are free to look but also listen. Also, just don't add extreme transitions or animations because they're there. We want to use things mindfully. The first aspect of design, and arguably the hardest, is balance in design. So before we begin, we're going to start with the basics of basics. Rule of thirds. Basically, rule of thirds is a grid that you are putting on your presentation or your image, and it shows that you want things off center, like you would like them on this part or this part. And the reason you would do that is because research shows that things are visually more appealing when they're off center. So balance in design doesn't necessarily mean things are symmetrical. In fact, the first thing we're going to talk about is asymmetrical design. So although things are not like smack dab in the middle, they're kind of off center a little bit, we still have a very balanced design with images and words. This is a website, so we've got tabs up here. This is a graphic. We've got images and graphics, and then our words. So you can see things are not symmetrical, but they're still really balanced. Here's an example of some symmetrical design. So you have things kind of smack dab in the middle, and that works too. It's similar. Things are similar or the same on either side of an axis. It can also be visually appealing. So just two different options there. Our next thing we're going to talk about is layout and composition. This is kind of the foundation of graphic design. So we're going to talk about things you want to keep in mind. Proximity, white space, alignment, contrast, which we've already mentioned, it's super important, and repetition. So we're going to start with proximity. Proximity is using space to show relationships in your content. This means related items are grouped together. Groups not related to each other should be visually separated. This makes your work easier to understand, whether it's just text or something more visual. So some examples, you're going to see a lot of examples from Canva. These are actual slides that I just pulled from Canva. So this one is functions of the ecosystem, and you can see different functions are physically spaced separate. And proximity kind of goes in with hierarchy that we're going to talk about later when we talk about typology, but you can see that like I've made things that are important, maybe a different color or bigger, and then it's kind of this hierarchy of like things that really are important are standing out. So we've got home food and then some descriptions here. We've got the name and then we have the date. That proximity of how things are spaced out is important. The next thing we're going to talk about is white space. to me, when I was learning about graphic design, white space was something that was more challenging. It can be, I think it can be more abstract, or it can be really like just practical, logical things on like, it is easier to read this text than it is to read this text here. So the space between things, and we call it white space. People also call it negative space. It's just like where there's a lack of something. So I love this Aladdin poster. It is an awesome use of white space or negative. And see, it's not white here. It's like this tan color. So negative space. And you're going to see, it's hard for me to pick like one design and show it to you because a lot of these have several design elements included in them. So you're going to find some really great examples of negative space in some slides we have later on. The next one we're going to talk about is alignment. When you're aligning images and headings, text boxes, it can be tricky. So again, there isn't a true like right way to do this, but the key here is whatever you do, be consistent, because without consistent alignment, your work is going to feel really disorganized. So just some examples, you can see how this was kind of everywhere, and then they kind of put these grids and aligned everything. So much more appealing. And here's a great example I found online of like a business card with poor alignment and a business card with better alignment. So you can see the difference that makes there. So this was the one I was talking about. This has a lot of great negative space incorporated in it, but it's also all these are perfect examples of contrast. So really high contrast with color, words. We didn't really have a great example with words. This is mostly with color. But these designs are really striking because they have great contrast. This slide is kind of interesting because I'm talking about repetition, and I've used samples where the designer has repeated an element over and over, but that's not necessarily what we're talking. These are just some cool examples to look at, but that's not what I'm really talking about here with repetition. When we're talking about repetition in design, it's so important. Every project should have a very consistent look and feel. This should be maybe a color palette you stick to. We're going to talk about that later on. And this is not just for aesthetic reasons. Consistency makes your work easier to read. So sticking with a color palette, sticking with a font, sticking with something even that you're just repeating over throughout your presentation is going to give it a sense of continuity, and it's going to help your students kind of stay with you. So this video, I'm not going to make a video or rewatch a video, but I'm going to link this video, and it's where I got all of the information about layout and composition. It is like so amazing. It's great for beginners. It shows you examples of everything that they talk about, and they kind of lay it out there. It's where, like I said, I got all the information from it. I love it. So check it out. The next thing we're going to talk about is color theory, which is something I really love. I've already broken one of my rules in this slideshow because this was the kind of the color palette I was going with, and I tried to stay with that, but obviously I added all these colors here. So, and for our color theory section, I kind of worked with that color palette, which is, which we're going to find out broke several other design rules, but that's okay. I said they were more of not hard and fast rules, but more guidelines. So color is super important in your design. How do you know what colors look good together? Color theory is how you know that. So before we move forward, let's talk about some basic keywords you're going to need to know. Hue, and I'm already breaking another rule, not reading word for word, but these are important. So hue just basically means color. Saturation is the intensity of the color, like how subtle or vibrant it is. And the value is how dark or light it is. So those are all important, and we're going to talk about those. We're going to keep those in mind as we move forward. So when you're coming up with a color palette, we're going to talk about just 3 really basic ways to come up with a color palette for your presentations or your content. So monochromatic is where you have one hue or color and you just go from like light to dark. So this is an example, and I actually color matched these from this color wheel graphic over here. I took these colors and pulled them out, and these are their actual color codes. I can show you how to do that. If you ever want to meet with me one-on-one and learn more about these things, I would love to talk to you about it. So I can show you a couple free tools where you can pull colors. There's a an extension called Color Picker, and if you have Chrome, if you're using Chrome, you can add it to your extensions, and it's this little eyedropper, and you can pick any color on any page and it gives you the color code for that. So that's what I did. And you can see we go from light to dark. And so this would be a great color palette to use. Then you have Analogous, which are colors next to each other. So this would be, I just picked 4 colors that were next to each other. This would be like warm versus cool colors. That's where you would see that. Complementary colors. Those are just colors across from each other on the color wheel. So these colors are across each other on the color wheel, and they are, I think they're really pretty. In fact, I actually went with a darker color here and a lighter color here, and I could probably even go lighter too. So I think that complementary and that contrast of dark and light looks really good. Some basic do's and don'ts with color. If your colors seem to vibrate, just turn it down. Start with one color and then try adjusting the lightness or darkness. And as we learned, that means saturation. And that might help. And if you watch, I'm going to tag another video. And if you watch the video, it kind of shows, it walks you through how to do that. Readability is so important. Colors must be legible, engaging, and easy on the eyes. Sometimes that means not using a color, or at least not so much of it. Pick one color and then choose neutrals like whites and blacks and grays. That way, that use of color that you do use really stands out. Every color sends a message. So consider the tone of your project and make sure you're using an appropriate color. This is really, they call this color psychology. To me, it's color theory too. It's like brands use this a lot. So yellow shows clarity, warmth, optimism, and you can think about brands that use that color. Orange is friendly, cheerful, enthusiastic. Red shows energy, passion, appetite. I think red also means like exciting, I guess energy, exciting. Green is usually nature, health, wealth. Purple, wisdom, royalty. It's also synonymous with creativity. Blue is like reliable, secure, and it sometimes is peaceful. So like, let's think about Walmart. So Walmart uses blue and yellow. So they're like the stable, reliable brand with warmth and optimism. But then Target uses that red because they're the exciting alternative to Walmart, right? Whole Foods is green. So it's like green, nature related, or Starbucks, which is supposed to be known as like fresh and growth and wealth. Brands choose their colors very carefully. So when you're creating a project, you should too. Think about what message you want to send and try to select appropriate colors. If you just Google color psychology, you'll find lots of really cool things. These links, I'm going to send you this presentation, and these links are clickable. And so you can click on that one and it will send you to canva.com/color/color palettes. And I just also like Google color palettes Canva and get it too. If I don't know what kind of palette I want to start with, I can go there and kind of browse their palettes, and then I can get the color codes and use them in what I'm designing. A good rule of thumb, and again, I said I was breaking this rule with this slide, with these sections of slides. You want to pick one main color, and you want to use it 60% of the time. Then you can pick a secondary color and use it 20% of the time. Then you can pick 2 accent colors and use them about 10% of the time. This rule is really hard for me to follow. Remember, everything we're talking about today are guidelines and not hard and fast rules. But if you're not sure where to start, that's a great place to start. This is another link to a website. It's the webaim.org website, and you can put in your colors to check your accessibility to see if your colors match up. And I did check the contrast of the colors in this slideshow. Mainly I was checking this beige color, this burgundy color, and the black, and they all scored very high. So we're good on that. And if you want to watch, again, one of my favorite videos, they're all a part of the same package of videos. This one is on color theory, and it's wonderful. Moving really quickly into our next section, typography. So typography is the style or appearance of text. It's also known as the art of working with text. So text. There are two basic types of fonts when you're talking about text, serif fonts and sans serif fonts. So serif has these little strokes that I've circled here called serifs, and they're attached to the main part of the letter. Sans serif, no extra stroke without serif. It's more clean and modern, easier to read on computer screens. Serif is more of a classic look, and it's good for projects that have a more traditional tone. I would use these serif. But if you have a lot of text, or if you're looking for students to read them on the computer, I would stay with sans serif fonts. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I think it's really funny. Fonts with baggage. Well, let's back up and talk about display fonts. So there are many styles of display fonts. You can use script, which is what I've used up here. You can use large block letters, all caps, fancy letters. The key here, though, is to just use a small amount of these display fonts because it can get overwhelming really quickly. So I would pick a fun display font for like a title or a header, or maybe a more graphics heavy design. Fonts express a lot more than words, and that moves us into the fonts with baggage. There's nothing wrong with these fonts that we're going to talk about that have some baggage, and I couldn't even find one of them on Canva. They don't have them, but I found something similar. So this is my Comic Sans lookalike font, and this one's actually called Comic Relief, but it's a Comic Sans kind of lookalike. So there's nothing wrong with Comic Sans or other fonts that have baggage. They just have a reputation for being outdated and maybe overused, and they might distract from your message or project, so you might just consider using something else. There are lots of similar options out there that don't have quite the same baggage, and like I said, I couldn't even find any of our examples of fonts with baggage on Canva. So some of the biggest fonts with baggage you might know: Comic Sans, Curls, and Papyrus. And I have another video at the end of this section, and they actually show you those fonts, and I know you will recognize them. And just a quick fun side note, I had a student in one of my graduate classes who turned in all her papers with Comic Sans, and they were good papers, but I couldn't help but think just using Comic Sans made it seem not as smart. So, and she was brilliant, but it was just but you're distracting from the message when you use one of those fonts with baggage. So just be mindful of it. So when you're designing things and you're using text, some things to keep in mind with fonts. If you go big and bold with something small, those look good. Or uppercase with lowercase. It's, again, all about contrast. Maybe something short with something tall. And this one's even an example of a serif and a sans serif. Thick and thin, sans serif, serif, or decorative and simple. And this is kind of the one that I went with for this presentation. And I'm going to have a handout with all this information. And this is the link to the video on typography, which we just covered kind of the highlights. But again, all this information came from there. Great information. They do a good job of showing you everything. And then I have this handout, and I have actual paper copies in my office if you ever want to stop by and pick one up. I have one laminated in a folder that I pull out constantly when I'm designing things. I got this from Miss Sadie Lewis at one of the conferences I went to, and she was amazing, and she said you can share this with anyone you want to. So it's just a quick kind of reference guide. It talks about all the things we've talked about today: layout, balance with different sizes, how to do your fonts and your text, and then things to keep in mind with color. And it even has those color palette links I was telling you about, and just some things to remember. And she even says, don't use that top row of colors, choose lighter or darker, that saturation we talked about. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but hopefully you're pausing it and writing down some good information, or you use this quick communication guide, because visual communication is so important. Remember, if you have any questions, you can always let me know.